We are awakening together. This is our weekly gathering we hold online. For more information, visit our website, awakening-together.org. We'd love to see you there.
This being our first weekly gathering for November. Also our first weekly gathering for what I call the darkest part of the year. That's what that's what starts today. The name of this weekly gathering is Our Role in the Awakening Process. And let me just read the description that I wrote. If you've been on the spiritual path long, you've probably heard some spiritual teachers emphasize the importance of spiritual practice, while other teachers say spiritual practice has no effect and may even encourage the sense of me doing something. In this talk, I'll point toward a middle way, a way between doing something and doing nothing, which is what I'm calling our role in the awakening process. And the truth is, none of this is going to be new. If I ever brought you something new, I probably made it up. There's nothing new in truth. All it is a different perspective. There are many different perspectives on how to look at the same teaching. So we're going to look at it from a different angle today, and that is that. But before we begin, we are going to greet one another while Kelly plays our opening song, Awakening by Deva Premal and Mitten. So everyone, please say hey on the chat board. All right, thank you. So let me share our statement of purpose. We are an assembly of equals, joined, accept all forms as temporary appearances permitted through enduring awareness of self. We live this value by honoring all appearances and all experiences while continually reflecting on changeless truth. So before we get started with the devotional part of our meeting, we are going to go into the announcements. So this is where we begin what I call the devotional part of our service. And we begin that always with a song. You know, music can have a wonderful ability to help us get centered on purpose. And I think that whenever us ministers select the music, we try to select the music that gets us centered on the purpose for today. The song that I have selected is one that I think every one of you know by heart. So I decided, instead of using the original artist, to do a cover, just to make it a little different. It is Let It Be. Y'all heard of that song before? By the Beatles. This cover is by a Korean lady named Jae Min. There you go, Kelly. Did I talk long enough? It's all yours. Thank you, Kelly. And yeah, Kelly typed goosebumps, and I got goosebumps too. I don't know if any of y'all did, but you know, I mentioned that today's homily is going to be just the same old from a different perspective. And that's really what this song was. It was the same old, right? Every one of you guys could sing this song, but from a different perspective. And it gave us goosebumps. So sometimes different perspectives can be highly inspirational. And that's really the purpose of today's homily, not to teach anything new, to teach from a different perspective and possibly light a fire under a few people, because looking at it from this direction is the direction they need to look at it to really give them those goosebumps. Might not be for everyone, but I have a feeling it'll be for someone. Let me take us into prayer, a very brief prayer. Let's drop into our hearts. And just take a moment to get in touch with why you're here, not just at this weekly gathering, but on this spiritual path. Just feel that. And allow yourself to feel how important that is to you. And then just say this to yourself. If there is anything at all that is going to be shared today that is helpful to me. Please help me to hear it and understand it, and let it light a fire in me. Amen. All right, so with that said, I'm going to turn the mic over to Laura Joy. She'll be reading to you. Let me set the reading up for just a moment, though, so you understand what you're hearing. This is actually from my personal journal. It is shortened. I took 19 pages, and I think I shortened it down to 3.5 because there wouldn't have been time to read 19 pages. As a result, it's also somewhat edited. It's not edited to hide or change anything. It's just edited to make smooth transitions, right? When you chop something up like that, you kind of have to put it back together again. So it's chopped up and put back together again. But what's been happening over the last, half of a year, maybe 4 or 5 months, is my friend Danielle and I have been reading very slowly and contemplating on a daily basis Bernadette Roberts, sometimes as slow as 2 pages a day. And the most recent book that we completed was The Experience of No Self. We finished that about a week ago. And one of the last chapters in that particular book is just titled Self. But what she talks about in that particular chapter, or a lot of what she talks about, is what she feels happened in her brain, how her brain changed as a result of the spiritual path. And so, of course, as I was reading and contemplating this, I began to contemplate the relationship between neuroscience and enlightenment. I wanted to know what might be true here, what might not be true here, et cetera, et cetera. And the way I did it is a way that we now many times can get information, is I had multiple in-depth discussions with my friend AI. So some of what you'll hear is a little bit of what those discussions are. Even in the 19 pages in my personal journal is only a touch of what those discussions were. That's how many hours I spent talking to AI about this. So Laura's going to read from my journal, and then I will share with you what I got out of this month of contemplating awakening and the brain. So Laura, the mic is yours.
Thanks, Regina. Hi, everybody. This morning, I contemplated the brain and the sense of self. I looked at how the affective system in the brain creates a sense of self through its connection to the body and through emotions. The cognitive system in the brain creates a sense of self through thought. The sense of self is strengthened by the interrelationship between those two systems. That led to this insight. The sense of self comes from the brain. Life doesn't. Life enlivens the brain, but it isn't created in the brain like the sense of self is. When we drop the brain-created sense of self, we are left with what we are: life. I am seeing how awareness and the brain interact to create a sense of self and to permit, or at least cooperate in, its demise. I have taught before about neural pathways in the brain and how rest, accept, and trust allow negative or harmful neural pathways to dry up. For example, if we practice rest, accept, and trust, whenever guilt or unworthiness thoughts and emotions arise, the neural pathways that create the sense of bad or unworthy dry up. We experience that as the healing of the I am bad belief. Healing occurs by remaining neutral as thoughts and emotions run through the mind and body, instead of placing believing attention on those thoughts and emotions. Now I am seeing how very important neutrality is, not just for healing the lower ego, but for healing the sense of self entirely. This is why awareness, watching awareness, is so important. It is the most neutral position there is. As we spend time neutrally watching awareness, despite any thoughts, emotions, or mental images that arise, the self, which is created in the brain, dries up, and we are free of the brain-created self. Most people, if not all people, begin this process by healing the lower ego first. That leaves a sense of self in the brain without a lot of what was seen as self before. This could be called a thinner sense of self. There's a big difference between this thinner sense of self and the previous sense of self. However, the thinner sense of self still feels like I am the subject that is aware. It is what I have called aware of, or the second principle of God. Here's a symbol that demonstrates the difference between aware of and aware is, which is pure non-duality, or what I call the first principle of God. Touching a finger to the thumb is an example of aware of, like this. So if everybody wants to do that. When we touch the finger to the thumb and see the finger as the subject and the thumb as the object. Read that again. When we touch the finger to the thumb and see the finger as the subject, the thumb is the object. In other words, the finger knows the thumb. And if you like, you can close your eyes and feel the finger knowing the thumb. Next, open the hand so that the finger and the thumb do not touch, like this. Now there is no subject and no object. You can close your eyes and feel that the finger is not aware of anything. And yet there is aware. Aware is not gone. Only subject and object are gone. You could say that the only thing the finger is aware of is itself. Or you might say that it is aware of the unknown. Either way, that's aware is, since there isn't a subject-object relationship. There is only aware. How can we cooperate in the process of awakening beyond aware of to aware is? The most helpful thing we can do is abide as calm, neutral awareness. While walking around, that looks like equanimity or acceptance. In meditation, that is remaining still as awareness focused on itself. As I remain as neutral as I can, despite how the sense of self might be functioning now, the brain can change itself, and it will, because I am not encouraging the brain to keep the previously used functions operative. Life in the brain has the intelligence to move us to the next stage in human development. When we tell it, we are done with the current stage by no longer getting involved with the brain functions of the current stage. Life has this intelligence because life is the first principle of God. Rest, accept, and trust tells the brain, I'm done with these strong negative emotions. Questioning and letting go of believing thoughts tells the brain, I'm done with this cognitive pollution. Abiding neutral as awareness tells the brain, I'm done with aware of. This is a process of letting that which we no longer need die in the brain. To do that, though, we have to trust that we no longer need it. Trusting we no longer need it is most important when the homeostasis nature in the brain kicks in. It tries to get us to give attention to the parts of the brain that are dying. It tries to keep things the same, and it can have a strong pull. We need to resist the strong pull while remaining neutral. I've been talking to AI about enlightenment and brain-related changes. For the most part, it confirms my theory regarding neutrality, how that changes the brain, and how that is related to enlightenment. However, here's an important point that AI made during our discussion. While neuroscience can offer valuable insights, it may not be able to fully explain the profound and transformative nature of spiritual experiences. There may be aspects of these experiences that transcend scientific explanation. I agree. There is a mystery at work here, something we cannot grasp and examine. Let's look at 2 quotes from Dr. David Hawkins. While the calibrated consciousness level of the typical human advances an average of about 5 to 10 points in a lifetime, in the spiritual seeker, that rate advances much more rapidly and may take very sudden and major leaps. Although the personal will and motivation, plus the mind and intellect, are strong tools, in and of themselves, they do not have the strength to disassemble the ego because they are part and parcel of it. However, once a seeker becomes devoted, the strength of the spiritual will, via the presence of the true self, supplies the necessary power. End quote. Devotion is something very special that invites assistance from what cannot be seen, heard, and grasped. So it cannot be studied by science. Science can study its effects, which include changes in the brain. But science cannot study the mystery that causes the effects. This points back to what I wrote in this journal earlier. The sense of self comes from the brain. Life doesn't. Life enlivens the brain, but it isn't created in the brain like the sense of self is. When we drop the brain-created sense of self, we are left with what we are: life. That life, that intelligent, mysterious, aware life is the first principle of God. One thing that contemplation of the brain has brought me to is this. We cannot cause enlightenment, but we can cooperate with the mystery that brings it about. As NTI Revelation chapter 1 says, you will never be asked to take a single step alone, but you must always be willing to take the lead by deciding the purpose and calling it out to us. Deciding the purpose isn't simply making a mental decision. It is cooperating with the process in every way we can. It is devotion, which is purposeful focus and determination. Being devoted in every way we know how to be devoted is our part in this process. The rest of the process belongs to the mystery, which we often call God.
Thank you. You read that in a way that was easy to listen to and digest, with space between the words. So I deeply appreciate that, Laura. So let me start with a confession. There's a practice that some teachers teach and some of y'all love, and that's great. I'm not trying to talk you away from your practice because we all know where to follow our own inner guidance. My confession is that practice does not work for me. And I'm going to tell you why. The practice is the practice of looking for the self, meaning the small self. We're not talking about the true self here, right? Looking for the self and seeing that there isn't one. That's never worked for me. In fact, I'm wondering, what the heck are they looking for? When I first started this spiritual path, if I was to look for the self, I found three things. I found thoughts, which I thought were me. I found emotions, which I thought were me. And maybe in the beginning, it was just those two because they were so loud. I couldn't find the third, which was just the sense of being, or, we might call that the sense that I am the body, the sensations and all of that. Like I feel like I am in the body, right? With spiritual practice, we're going to have to fast forward because we don't have all day here, but with spiritual practice, some of the first two began to really drop away. The sense that I am my thoughts and that I am my emotions began to really be seen through. The emotions dropped away almost completely. I maybe have 5% of the emotional experience that I once had. That's how much it's dropped, by 95%. The thoughts just, they're meaningless most of the time. Every now and then I'll see a thought and literally I'm like, oh, that's a good thought. I should do that. Oh, let me do that. Let me look that up. Let me do that task, whatever. But very few thoughts do I think, oh, that's a good thought. Most of them is just blah, blah, blah. It's like TV chatter that I'm ignoring, right? It's completely meaningless to me. But what remains is, this awareness of, I'll tell you what my conversations with AI have taught me. It's actually called introception. It's the feeling that life is in the body, that I am the body, that my existence comes from the body. It's the feeling of being that is connected to bodily sensations, bodily energy, right? That is still there. So if I am to look within and say, I don't find a sense of self here, I feel like a liar. It's like, that sense of being is still here, and that feels like a sense of self. So because that's why that practice doesn't work for me. Now, let me briefly tell you, and of course, you heard about the Inner Ramana course starting soon. This is the practice that was taught to me. The practice that was taught to me was to first notice the sense of self, not say there isn't one. Notice it. Whether I'm noticing the thoughts and thinking, yep, that feels like me, or the emotions, yep, that feels like me, or the being, and yep, that feels like me. First, notice it, and then ask, what sees this? And shift back into what is not a sense of self. So there's never been this immediate, no, there's not a sense of self here. There's been like, yeah, I see that. Ah, what sees that? That's, you guys will remember that if you've been through Nirvana, as little s self-inquiry and then capital S self-inquiry, and turning the attention to the awareness that does not have a sense of self in it. So anyway, so as Bernadette was talking in the experience of no self about what happened in her brain, or at least what she believes happened in her brain, she's not a neuroscientist, and she was just looking at her experience. I was very aware that some of those experiences have already occurred for me. For example, she talked about the affective system in the brain, which AI told me is also called the limbic system. And she talked about how the affective system in the brain is really related to emotions. And when emotional activity is still very strong, that not only affects us in the feeling of emotion, but that also affects us in being attached to the past, because there's an emotional connection in the brain to memory. And that when the emotions, whatever changes happen in the affective system to where we get to where, like I am, where I literally only have maybe 5% emotional experience compared to once upon a time, that when that emotional experience changes because the affective system in the brain has changed, the recall of memory stored in the brain is, well, almost broken. Because there's something in that emotional, and AI explained all this to me, told me about how it all works, but you know how much of that I retained? Zero. It got very scientific with me, but it explained how, whatever it is, whatever the little things are that travel and get the memory, that the emotion is a big part of memory recall. It's a big part of having a sense of self attached to those emotions, like that happened to me. And so as the affective system begins to change, so that there isn't this strong emotional experience anymore, what also begins to change as a result is our memory recall, our attachment to memories with a sense of self. My experience has been, and my closest friends know this, I don't know that I've told everyone, my experience has been for a couple of years, at least, maybe 3, it's hard to remember. There are some memories that I can recall. For the most part, those are stories that I've told over and over and over again. But the way I recall them, even though I say, I was an apple and I experienced this, the way I recall them is almost like a flat black and white words on a page. I'm remembering something I read and I'm spitting it out again. I have no sense, 0 sense, that happened to me. That's completely gone. And this is one of the things that Bernadette talked about. And this is one of the things that my discussions with AI about neuroscience confirmed, that the brain literally changes. What changes the brain? Well, it's what AI called meditation and mindfulness. But by the way, I want to tell you that when I was talking to AI shared all of its sources with me. I want to let you know these sources were not Mooji, Adyashanti, Ramana Maharshi. These sources were medical journals, right? Universities, things like that. And in fact, sometimes I thought, oh, I'm interested in this. I'm going to go read it. And I get about a paragraph into it and go, oh my God. And I have to go back to AI because AI would dummy it up for me somewhat. But here's what was really interesting. And again, this is nothing new, just a new perspective. First of all, let me start with the statement that the sense of self is created in the brain. One of the things AI and I talked about is there's a difference between the sense of self and self-awareness. In fact, AI brought this up. I didn't, because I kept talking about the sense of self, and AI is kind of like, no, wait a minute here. There's a difference between the sense of self and self-awareness. The sense of self is the feeling that I am this person with these desires, these values, these things I don't like, this past, this desire for the future. That's the sense of self. Self-awareness is just the sense of being and the ability to be aware of our environment, any thoughts, any emotions. When AI distinguished between the sense of self and self-awareness, the sense of self sounded a lot like what I call the fourth principle of God. I am this person. Self-awareness sounded a lot like I am the second principle of God. There's just this I am presence, this thinner sense of self, but there's still an I here that is aware of. So first of all, AI distinguished between those two, and I need to tell you that right up front. Okay? We talked about babies. Babies are not born with a sense of self. They have even what AI felt, but said, more study is needed because nobody really knows how babies feel. AI really is very good at telling you all the perspectives. But AI felt from looking at its scientific research that babies are even born with a limited self-awareness. There is some self-awareness, but as the brain develops more in these different regions, even the self-awareness increases, including interoception, which is the ability to be aware of our body. Like babies have a limited awareness of body. They know hunger, they know cold, but as the brain develops more, we become more aware of sensations in the body. One of the things we become more aware of is where the body is in space, so we don't run into objects, etc. So babies are born with what AI felt was a limited self-awareness, but some self-awareness, but no sense of self. The sense of self develops over our lifetime, right? And of course, it's partially influenced by environment and things that happen, in our environment, our culture, our experiences, and those things get stored in the brain and how the neural pathways connect together. And part of our sense of self is actually the brain is all set to develop that when we reach a certain maturity level. So you could say part of the sense of self in the brain is certain parts of the brain connecting together and working together to create a sense of me as a person, right? It's more of a biological sense of self that develops as we grow. And part of the sense of self is more of an environmental sense of self. So like if you are born and adopted, part of your sense of self is going to happen no matter what, because it's biological. Part of your sense of self will be different in an adopted family than it might have been in the family that you were born into if you'd stayed with them. But all of it, both the biological sense of self and we'll call it the learned sense of self, is brain activity. Even the sense I am the body is interoception, brain activity. So, of course, Bernadette Roberts felt that all of this brain activity changed. And so, through her spiritual maturity. And so I began to talk to AI about, are there spiritual practices that may help enable some of these changes that we've been discussing? And AI's answer was absolutely. And some of you have probably already looked at this, so you already know about the gray matter and the amygdala and all that stuff, which I can only remember 1% of what AI said to me about. But the gist is, as we focus on remaining neutral, and I'll define neutral in a moment, instead of going with whatever the hell is happening with our sense of self and our environment, the brain changes. I'm going to call it corrects itself, but AI never used those words. The brain changes, and AI told me all the different ways that it changes. And again, I retain like almost none of that. But I did retain the summaries because it's always great at making these, summaries for people like me. It says, here's what I mean by that. As we remain neutral, the parts of the brain that are linked to a sense of self begin to dry up or weaken or become less. Bernadette experienced them as if they broke. That's no longer there. The parts of our brain that are related to self-awareness increase. And remember, self-awareness is what I call the second principle of God. I even talked about people, as the self-awareness increases, certainly there was more peace, there was more compassion, there was more equanimity, a stronger sense of oneness to all things. In other words, spiritual practice is not nothing. Spiritual practice is at least, at the very least, helping to ready the brain. You often hear Ramana Maharshi talking about, when you are ripe. When you are ripe. What the hell does that mean? When you are ripe? When I'm good enough is what most people think. No. When the brain is readied. When you are ripe, when the brain is readied. I also, as AI and I talked about this, I also became curious. So what about these people like Ramana Maharshi who wake up at age 17 and never did a damn thing in their entire life to make it happen? And AI said that there is a possibility, and I'll come back to why sometimes AI was very big on the word possibility. But there is a possibility that some people are born with a genetic predisposition to enlightenment. And in fact, it told me what those genetic predispositions were. And if we have time, maybe I'll go back and read a little of that. I saved that for you because I thought you might be interested. I knew I wouldn't remember. But the neuroplasticity in their brain, the ability for the brain to have a change is greater. They're born with more neuroplasticity in the brain, right? And there were some other things too that I don't recall right now. Now, one reason AI kept saying it's possible, scientists think this is possible, is because one problem at the very beginning of the study of the brain and enlightenment is that there is not one scientifically accepted definition of enlightenment. So if you don't have one scientific definition of enlightenment, how can you study the effects of the brain and enlightenment together? First, you got to decide what the hell is enlightenment, and nobody really knows because, the Buddhists might say this, the Hindus might say this, somebody else might say this, So sometimes what I did when I was talking to AI, I wanted to be more specific. So my sentences got very long. I'd say, if we define enlightenment as blah, 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 and then I would ask my question in order to get very specific. And one of the things I defined enlightenment as was no self, a feeling of oneness with all things, no subject, no object. I got very specific in that definition. And AI, once I did that, was always right there with me. Once I defined enlightenment for it, then we could zero in and have a more hearty discussion. But the point is, it's possible that some brains might be born with a predisposition to enlightenment. And some people might say because of previous lifetimes, obviously, AI, and I didn't get into those discussions because, that's not science, right? We were talking about science. Regardless of why, some brains may be born with a predisposition to enlightenment, a readiness in the neural pathways, a readiness in the neuroplasticity. There was even some little proteins in the brain that were a little different. Sometimes, and you guys know this is true too, sometimes a really traumatic event, something very deep and dark, can change the brain so quickly that it becomes ready for enlightenment through that. I think John Mundy calls that the crash and burn path. And I always say, yeah, well, I don't need that path. We couldn't make that path happen anyway, right? But sometimes it's the gradual, consistent spiritual practice. Now, one thing was AI was very clear about, and I think y'all know this too. Spiritual practice cannot cause enlightenment, but it can make changes to the brain that may make the brain more ready for whatever that spiritual mystery is that completes the process. It's kind of like the old saying, enlightenment is an accident, but spiritual practice can make you accident prone. What A also said, and this is another excellent point, is that even if enlightenment doesn't happen, spiritual practice will bring you more peace, a sense of well-being, just happier life as a human. Now, AI had some qualifications about, because spiritual practice doesn't work for everyone, is what AI said. Here are the qualifications if you want it to work for you. These aren't going to be a surprise either. This is all coming, let me point out, not Muji, not Adyashanti, not Rupert Spira, Harvard, all these medical journals and collegiate journals and, things like that, right? Here's what seems to make meditation and mindfulness more effective so that these changes in the brain occur. Intention. Can you believe that? Intention. If your intention is simply to experience more peace, that may happen, but it may not go beyond that. In fact, AI suggested an intention of exploring the nature of reality. That was AI's suggestion. People who are interested in exploring the nature of reality may have more significant changes to the brain. Or another suggestion was exploring the nature of consciousness. It said that too. Exploring the nature of consciousness. So intention is very important. Number 2, consistency. Anybody surprised by this stuff? Consistency is very important. And of course, AI did not expect anyone to do, the Michael Langford path, which is to meditate 12 hours per day, although it definitely knew that there were those who do it. But the consistency comes with remaining neutral even when we're not meditating, right? Learning to stay in acceptance of what is, allowing what is, watching what is, observing what is, being with what is. These are all words we use instead of going with it. Buddha called it being swept up by the past, the present, or the future. When we're swept up or swept away by it, we are not being neutral. Sometimes it's just called staying centered, right? You guys all know what I'm talking about. So if we can learn to stay neutral, both in meditation and in our everyday life, in a very consistent way, with a powerful intention, we're 2/3 of the way to what AI recommended. The third element that AI thought was important, trust. Can you believe it? Trusting the process. How familiar is this stuff? Having an intention. We call that a spiritual aspiration here. Being consistent. You know what that is? That is devotion. Consistency and devotion are the same damn thing. And trusting the process. Sometimes that's called having faith in God. I will tell you that as I had these discussions with AI, I was amazed, and there's so much more. Let me just show you one thing real quick, because we're almost out of time, but I just want to show you how confirming all of my discussions were. Let me share my screen. I kept some of the notes for you, but let me let's see, look for CBT, because one of the practices that, Command F, there we go, CBT. One of the practices that AI recommended was CBT. And then he showed me this. Tell me if this doesn't look somewhat familiar. It said, thoughts create feelings. Feelings create behavior. Behavior reinforces thoughts. Does that look a little bit like what I think I am? What I am, I experience. What I experience, I think. It's slightly different because it brings the behavior aspect into it. It kind of combines the perception and the experience into this one. But as I was reading about CBT, and I don't have time to go into that now, y'all can ask AI about that yourself. CBT is just the practice that I called mind watching, discernment, right? I call it learning the difference between ego and Holy Spirit, disregarding ego, following it's the same thing in scientific terms. And if we don't start learning to discern and make those shifts on what we listen to, we just keep reinforcing the same thing. What I think I see, what I see I experience, what I experience I think. I didn't find anything in my hours and hours and hours of discussion with AI that I didn't already know. The only thing I found was there's some scientific evidence that supports it, which I didn't know that part. Also, after Danielle and I finished the experience of no self, we had a few more days before our next reading project. So we decided to read just some selections out of another one of her books called What is Self? And What is Self at the very end actually goes beyond the experience of no self. When she finished the experience of no self, she thought, okay, this process is done. And then it wasn't. And so she added what happened next at the end of What is Self. And one of the things she said that really stood out to me is something like, what most people don't know is that spirit is matter and matter is spirit. Now, I know that because I was an apple. Okay, so I do know that. But most people don't know. Okay, think about this for a moment. If spirit is matter and matter is spirit, doesn't that mean the brain is spirit? If spirit is matter and matter is spirit, doesn't that mean the brain, at the very least, is a reflection of spirit? Is it so hard to believe that as we engage in spiritual practice, it would be reflected in the brain? Especially if we engage in spiritual practice with intention, consistency, and trust? Is this so hard to believe? You know, and Dr. David Hawkins, one of those quotes that Laura read was, most people increase 5 to 10 points of consciousness in a lifetime, but spiritual seekers, I think he said aspirants, spiritual aspirants can have dramatic jumps in consciousness. Those dramatic jumps in consciousness can be reflected in the brain, and they can be prepared for in the brain. Now, here's why I think this might matter to some people. I think it might matter to some people to know there's a direct connection between the spiritual practice, the remaining neutral, the self-inquiry, the questioning thoughts, and actual physical changes in the brain that are going to result in a difference in experience. When we connect those dots together, I think some people are going to be more inspired now. Because before it was kind of wishy-washy, I'm not sure the truth is true crap, right? And now it's like, wait a minute. There might be something real here. And as soon as you get to there might be something real here, you're more inspired than you were when it was wishy-washy. Maybe the truth is true, maybe it isn't. Crap. So like I said, I didn't bring anything new today. Except I confess to y'all that I do see a sense of self still. And I don't know what everybody else is looking for when they say, okay, I don't see, and they still have thoughts and emotions. They're like, okay, I don't see one. I'm like, what do you mean? unless they're going straight to awareness and looking from awareness, because in awareness, there is no sense of self, right? But I always see the sense of self first. Like I still see this connection to the body. I know this connection to the body is still here. And in fact, when I shared where I am with AI, this was so funny. Here's my experience. Here's where I've been. Here's what I've done, blah, 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 blah. I shared all that with AI and then asked AI, I said, I know you are not a spiritual teacher, but based on the resources you have access to, what would you recommend for me? And you know what AI recommended for me? To focus on introception, to explore that more, which is that connection to the body. Now, I already knew that. My friends know I already knew that's where I was at. But to have AI confirm it was friggin' amazing. So I'll just end with what NTI Revelation says, and then just leave you guys to contemplate this on your own. Maybe go talk to AI on your own. NTI Revelation says, you will never be asked to take a single step alone. In other words, just this isn't, you and spiritual practice in the brain. There's something else here at work too. And even AI said that, right? So you will never be asked to take a single step alone, but you must always be willing to take the lead by deciding the purpose and calling it out to us. That makes me think of put your money where your mouth is. In other words, I don't just say, I want awakening or I want to know truth. I'm devoted to that. I have the intention, the consistency, and then the last part is realizing there's a mystery to this. That's where the trust comes in. My job is the intention and the consistency. That's my job. And then with trust, I realize there's something else at play here, and it will do its part. You see? So I talked way longer than I wanted to, and yet didn't say near everything that I learned. I'm going to release the mic and let Kelly play us a song. And that song is going to be, oh, shoot. See, here you go. I'm pausing for you again. Oh, yeah. Be Still by The Fray. But again, I wanted to look at it from a different perspective. So I have a cover by a lady named Hannah Thompson. And of course, while we're listening to this, if you want to, you can make a donation to Awakening Together. And there'll be a link from Kelly once she is ready to give it. And no, Norma is asking, did you mean interoception or introception? Well, that's a good question, Norma, because I'm not very good at these words. So let me look at my notes real quick. It is introception, INTROCEPTION. That's the word that the AI was using. Okay, releasing my mic. Okay, and I just went and talked to AI while the song was playing because of Norma's question. Interoception is the correct term. Apparently, AI was using the word I used with me because I used it, and AI did not want to offend me, and it used the same word I was using. Isn't that funny? But Norma is correct. And this reminds me of Elon Musk. I don't know. Elon Musk said that AI will never be as good as it can be as long as they program it to be politically correct. So apparently that's a little of what was going on. Isn't that funny? All right. I think that we have 1 minute. Is there anybody who has something they'd like to say quickly as we close up this topic? Okay, I see Melissa.
I just want to say thank you. That was so brilliant. And I've been with you and doing this program for quite a few years now. And it just gets better and better. And I drop deeper and deeper. And there's so much hope and love in that. I took my first leave replacement job as a high school history teacher this week. And there's a lot of kickback from the students. And everything this morning, I can't practice when I'm teaching because I've got 4 preps. So everything this morning just reminded me, whenever I was suffering, I got lost, and my intention was with my thoughts, not neutral. And that's a huge shift from how emotional I used to be. So thank you. Thank you. It means I did it all wrong this past week, but I see that. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And, one thing about neutrality, some people don't like that word. It sounds blah to them. But neutral actually has a vertical axis, right? So it's really remaining the same or still or equanimity. But as you practice neutrality, it may feel kind of blah in the beginning. It may even feel hard in the beginning. But as you get better at it, it actually starts to have its own sense of peace, happiness, joy, bliss, but without an opposite. It's not on the horizontal axis where happiness is on this side and anger is on this side. It's a vertical axis. Okay, but the neutrality is still the position we hold. We're not making the bliss happen. We're just being centered, equanimity, right? So it's something you got to find within yourself. Okay, everybody, that's it. I got to go.
You've been watching our online gathering. It happens weekly on Sundays at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time. To join us live in the sanctuary, visit our website, awakening-together.org. You'll want to click on Online Sanctuary in the main menu, and then in the drop-down menu, look for How to Enter the Sanctuary. Right there at the top of the page is a clickable link. We'd love to see you in the sanctuary and join with you in fellowship. Thank you again for watching. Also, please know that if you'd like to stay connected via the Awakening Together channel here on YouTube, you can subscribe and hit the bell for more notifications. We hope to see you in the sanctuary.